Is there going to be a social media ban for under 16s? Yes.
We've had a lot of people asking us if this is a way of introducing digital ID by the back door. Will this legislation mean we can't use VPNs? So is it true that Blue Sky is exempted? Hello and welcome to the Free Speech Union podcast. I'm Jan McVarish, the Free Speech Union's Education and Events Director. And today the founder and General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Lord Young, will be answering your questions about the government's plan to ban social media for under 16s and how that might impact on internet privacy for adults as well. So welcome, Toby.
Thank you, Jan.
We've had hundreds of people write in with their questions and their points. But before we get to those, can you just remind us where we're at with this piece of proposed legislation?
Yes. So the government has announced that it's going to bring forward regulations to ban under 16s or restrict the access under 16s have to social media. Those regulations haven't been published yet. And what the government has published about its plans is pretty vague. So the Free Speech Union is holding fire before firing off any legal challenges until we actually see the regulations the government's intending to bring before Parliament.
OK. And when they say social media, what do they mean by that?
They mean, I think, they don't just mean social media platforms like X, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. They also mean YouTube, and that's controversial, and maybe we can get into that. I know my own children used YouTube to help revise for their GCSEs, which they wouldn't have been able to do if they were banned from accessing YouTube.
Right. Did they made a distinction between, is there like an educational YouTube or something? Did I read something about that?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen any of that granular detail. It may be that there will be exemptions for educational content, yes.
Right.
And it's also not clear whether it'll include AI chatbots. So will children be prevented from using Grok, for instance, or ChatGPT? Some people will think that's a good thing, but do we really want a generation growing up unable to, familiarize themselves with AI systems until they reach the age of 16.
And what about messaging services like WhatsApp and Signal? Are they included?
I think they're excluded for the time being.
So we'll come on to that question a little bit more in more detail later on. But what else is in the plans?
Well, Liz Kendall, who's the Secretary of State at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, said recently that she is considering a VPN ban. So one of the reasons the Australian ban on under 16s accessing social media hasn't been very effective, something like 60% of under 16s in Australia is still on all the social media channels you can imagine, is because of VPN use. So the government is considering, apparently, banning VPNs, which gets us into, I think, very dangerous territory, puts us in the same club as North Korea and Iran.
Well, we've got a specific question from one of our members about VPNs later, so I'll come back to that. But I think some of the other things that they were proposing or possibly that might be included were stopping live streaming for under 16s. Well, I'm not quite sure. What does that mean? That means in gaming, or does that mean when they're just on social media themselves?
Yeah, it's not clear, and the devil will be in the detail, but it seems they want to include Twitch in these sites that they either restrict or completely cut off children from having access to.
So not being under 16 myself, what is Twitch? Is it?
Yeah, my children could tell you. It's essentially a site on which people live stream their gaming.
Oh, okay.
But they also use it for other purposes too.
Okay. And so the idea would be to sort of stop children communicating with strangers, because at the moment that seems to be possible. Is that
Stranger danger, I think, that's the rationale.
Okay. And is there something about a curfew?
I think, yeah, Keir Starmer, I think, at one stage mentioned a curfew. And I think in some other countries, notably China, I think curfews have been imposed on children's access to the internet in general and video gaming more broadly. So that could be something this government is considering. It's hard to know how it would be enforced.
All of which I could imagine if I had younger children, I would be probably pretty welcoming of. So again, we'll come on later on to how actually quite a lot of the people that have asked us questions are sort of sympathetic to the intentions and they're alert to the problems, but we need to talk about what the sort of downside of the solutions might be. So I'm going to put to you some of the questions now from people. So first of all, on the question of sort of digital ID. So we've had a lot of people asking us whether they're right to be concerned that this is a way of introducing digital ID by the back door. One of our members, Ibrahim Bassioni, says, once mandatory age verification is established, is it entirely foreseeable that the requirement will be extended to all users, ultimately compelling adults to verify their identity through government-issued documentation, such as a passport or photocard driving licence? Such a development, he says, would amount to the de facto introduction of a digital identity system by stealth. I mean, is that a concern you share?
Yes, it is. And there is, in the King's speech, there was a digital ID bill flagged. So we know that's coming, unless Andy Burnham decides to junk the King's speech and come up with a new one. But yeah, I think that's an absolutely legitimate concern. I think for various reasons, anonymity on social media is important. The Free Speech Union has defended that principle before. It's important for whistleblowers. It's important for religious apostates. It's important for internal dissidents in authoritarian countries. So I'd be very concerned if anonymity is effectively ended by whatever proposals the government brings forward. If you appreciate content like this, subscribe now to the Free Speech Union's podcast channel. It'll help others to find our content. There's no, I don't think, any intrinsic reason why you couldn't verify your age with a private company. I mean, there are already private companies out there. If you want to access age-gated content on social media, you can go to a private firm and they can provide you with a token effectively proving that you are 18 or over,
right,
without disclosing any other details about your identity to the social media platform in question. It doesn't need to be the government that provides you with the kind of relevant documents to approve that you are over 16 or over 18. But it looks as though the government wants to be the monopoly provider of digital ID. And that then does, I think, begin to look very suspicious.
Right. Because what ID do under 16-year-olds have anyway? They only have a passport if they've got one and a birth certificate, presumably.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
yeah.
But they could, if they wanted to, go to any one of a number of private companies. I mean, they'd have to entrust that private company with some data documents. But frankly, I'd have more confidence that they'd be able to protect my privacy than a government-operated design scheme. In Australia, they haven't accompanied the social media ban with a rollout of national digital ID. Privacy is, I think, even better protected in Australia than it is here. So that was a big concern politically. So they've effectively tasked the e-Safety Commission with coming up with a range of options, private sector options for verifying your age. And facial recognition is the kind of preferred route. But some of the work the FSU of Australia has done has been to show that the facial recognition technologies being recommended by the e-Safety Commission aren't very good at telling the ages of Indigenous Australian people.
Right.
So if you're an Indigenous Australian person, even if you're a child, it will have you looking 50.
Right.
It just doesn't work for Indigenous people. So effectively, the digital ID recommended by the e-Safety Commission is racist.
Okay. So that does kind of bring us on to another kind of question from a member about VPN. So Valerie Healy asks, will this legislation mean we can't use VPNs?
Well, it might. That might be one of the regulations. They might try and ban VPN use for under 16s, or they might try and ban it more widely. But I think that is definitely something the Free Speech Union will challenge if the government tries to do that. That seems straightforwardly a breach of various articles of the European Convention on Human Rights.
And presumably government uses VPNs.
Oh, VPN use across the government is absolutely rife.
Yes.
Indeed, sometimes the security advisors in the House of Lords recommend you do use VPNs. And there was a funny piece in Order, Guido Fawkes, pointing out just how prevalent VPN use was across all Whitehall departments.
Right.
So maybe there'll be an exemption for, politicians and officials.
In true North Korean style.
Yep.
And so another question on privacy, I suppose, related to VPNs, is somebody's saying, well, after Brexit, she or he went private on their social media, or went anonymous on their social media because their views were attracting such kind of vitriol from colleagues and neighbours. And so they're very worried by the idea that they will have no access to the public sphere, I suppose, via digital realm. Without revealing who they are. I mean, is that something that you think realistically that is something people should really be worried about? Is that the primary kind of free speech aspect of this?
I think it's there are other kind of broader free speech concerns, I guess, with the rollout of national digital ID. But yes, that does feel like a legitimate concern if you actually have to identify yourself. If anonymity on social media platforms is effectively prohibited by these new regulations, and it would make it very difficult for people to post pseudonymously or anonymously.
And so many of the issues that we've dealt with, where people have been subject to speech restrictions, those issues have been broken open by people acting anonymously. So coming back to which platforms are likely to be subject to the ban, you said earlier that it's likely to include Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook and X, but it doesn't intend to ban WhatsApp and Signal. And one of our members, Gareth Rees, says a particularly egregious aspect is that the left-wing platform Blue Sky is exempted. This alone invalidates any claim that the ban is to protect children. So is it true that Blue Sky is exempted? Or what's going on?
Actually, we've in another capacity, I own this news publishing site called The Daily Skeptic, and we published several pieces pointing out just what a cesspool Blue Sky is. I mean, if you think X is bad, spend some time on Blue Sky. I mean, it's just an unending barrage of hatred,
right?
But bile. Yet when the government announced its intention to legislate in this area, it did produce an indicative list of the sites likely to be caught by the ban, and they included X, Facebook, Instagram, but excluded Blue Sky. And I think the government have now rowed back and said, well, this is only an indicative list. Once we've finalised the regulations, it'll then become clear what the criteria are for being on the banned list. And we don't yet know whether Blue Sky will be on the naughty step or not.
Right.
And in Australia, Blue Sky hasn't been caught by the under-16 social media ban. But Blue Sky, in typical Blue Sky style, have volunteered to be on the naughty step.
The worst kid in the school.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this does point to a more alarming aspect, an alarming aspect of this ban, which is it's going to be selective. It's not going to be a blanket ban on all social media sites. I think in many ways that would be much easier to live with. The problem with a selective ban is, well, can you really trust, Ofcom doing the bidding of Liz Kendall to make completely politically impartial, unbiased decisions about which sites to ban under 16-year-olds from, particularly when they also want to give 16-year-olds the vote. So that, I think, is deeply problematic. And the argument for a blanket ban, I mean, it's problematic in various ways too. But one strong argument for it is that if under 16s just cannot access social media, if they're unable to do so, then that decreases the pressure on Ofcom to censor what the rest of us can see. It makes for a more permissive regulatory regime when it comes to adult content. At least that was my hope initially. That may turn out to be very naive, and I think it has turned out to be naive because they don't intend to impose a blanket ban. They want to decide themselves what children can and can't see.
And would legislation possibly be able to keep up with new platforms emerging? I mean, because presumably they can name. Would they have to actually name the platforms in the legislation? Do you think?
I think if they name the platforms in the legislation, that could render them vulnerable to legal challenge by the named platforms. I mean, they've already done it, so maybe they didn't think that through very carefully. But I think it'll be a set of criteria,
right?
And they'll set out an argument for these criteria, and lo and behold, X will fall foul of these criteria.
And so on the flip side of that, of there's the restricting access to information for young people, but then there's also this idea that they'll give prominence on social media to certain trusted sources like the BBC. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a mental proposal. I think from the government. It's just come out in the form of a media green paper, and it's emerged from DCMS rather than Lisa Nandy, clearly in a turf battle, it seems, with Liz Kendall as to which department is going to own, media censorship. And in the media green paper, the proposal is that trusted public service media sources, and in particular public service broadcasters, their content should be given greater prominence on social media platforms, not just social media platforms that are accessible to under 16-year-olds, all social media platforms. And in addition to forcing platforms like YouTube to boost, the BBC's content. So if you search on YouTube for an instructional video about how to do the foxtrot, you're likely to get an episode of Strictly Come Dancing come up as your kind of first hit. It's just absolutely ludicrous. But in addition, the government says in the Green Paper that they're considering extending the regime to include trusted news publishers as well. So publishers of newspapers and magazines. So somehow we're supposed to trust Ofcom, and in this case DCMS, to make the right decisions about which sources to boost and which sources to shadow ban / suppress, without pursuing their own political agendas, which
it's amazing.
Is completely ludicrous.
It's a licensed media, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely. I mean, and I think I've written about this in The Spectator, but I think part of what's going on here is that they want to offer both a carrot and a stick to newspapers and magazines to induce them to sign up to a state-approved press regulator like Impress. That was a big post-Leveson inquiry battle, a battle won by defenders of the free press. There is now a voluntary system of self-regulation, IPSO, which works perfectly well. But the government have long wanted, members of this government have long wanted, I think, to replace IPSO with state regulation of the press. And this could be a way of inducing magazine owners, newspaper owners to sign up to it, because if their content is boosted, then that's a carrot. And if it's suppressed, that's a stick.
It can be exceptionally difficult to find reliable business insurance, which also has fantastic customer service, which is why MB&G Insurance is an absolute lifesaver. I'm Tom Harris, Director of Analytics at the Free Speech Union. MB&G Insurance is a specialist insurance provider with over 40 years of experience supporting businesses across automotive, furniture, and home sectors. With partners such as Lloyd Motor Group and furniture retailer Dreams, MB&G Insurance deliver prompt claims payment and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, go to mbginsurance.co.uk. And now, back to the video.
So separately, the question of the algorithms. So Martin Clark, who I think may be a member, says that the problem is the algorithms, and that social media per se is not the problem. The problem is the addictive algorithms designed to feed you more. Efforts should concentrate on this rather than banning the media itself. What do you think? I mean, we've had a lot of people are very concerned about this kind of addictive behaviour. I mean, there's so much. It's become a common sense idea that doom scrolling, that all the children are kind of being mentally scarred by this. What do you think about that?
I think people sometimes attribute kind of malevolent qualities to algorithms that aren't actually there. I mean, an algorithm really is just something feeding you content based on what you've previously searched for or what you've previously liked or disliked. So it's sort of, you can say, yes, that has harmful psychological effects because it's constantly feeding things it knows you're going to be interested in. And maybe that does lead to, unhealthy behavior like excessive doom scrolling. But it's not, I think people imagine that that there's something more malevolent going on, and that these kind of ghosts in the machine are trying to force people to engage with unsuitable content, whether it's kind of pornography or whether it's boosting Restore's content, Rupert Lowe's content, steering people into down these kind of far right rabbit holes. I mean, I do think a lot of that is wildly exaggerated, and for the most part, algorithms are just based on the personal choices that you've made.
Yes,
and that can lead to addictive behaviour. And maybe you can go in, I think, into the settings and say you'd like to see content that you might not necessarily know you're interested in advance. But I think there are wanting to kind of rein in the algos. It seems like they're conjuring up a kind of bogeyman that I think out of thin air.
So what about then? But then quite a few people who would side with us on lots of other issues are very keen on this ban because they are very concerned about the effect on on children in particular. And we've had people responding to us when we called for questions here, citing Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And obviously it's become a bit of a common sense idea that you get social media coming in and then you have a kind of, drastic increase in mental health problems, particularly amongst young women. But do you think they often compare this to alcohol and cigarettes and how we restrict that to children? So why wouldn't we restrict social media? What do you think that comparison works?
And we've had this conversation before in connection with another project of the Free Speech Unions, which is wanting to persuade the Department for Education and the Home Office to include free speech amongst those British values that English schools are expected to promote. And I think in the past you've objected to that on the grounds that, children shouldn't have the same right to free speech as adults, and actually that could be a recipe for chaos in the classroom.
Yes,
and I think it's an interesting philosophical area as to when you kind of acquire in the course of maturing the kind of full suite of human rights. But I could understand why a 15-year-old child, particularly a 15-year-old child who's going to have to make an informed decision at the ballot box, when they turn 16, would legitimately protest about their right to see and express different ideas was being restricted.
Yes. There's all kinds of inconsistency at the moment about where we think the age of majority occurs. So some people say, the brain's not formed until 24. Other people, as you say, want them to be voting at 16. Some people are trying to push the age at which you can drive up. And so the whole thing is a bigger discussion anyway, isn't it?
The one people are fond of bringing up is puberty blockers. So
Yes.
How can a child at the age of 15 not be trusted to be on social media, but be trusted to make a decision about whether or not to embark on an irreversible medical pathway?
Notably, the government having failed to protect children from that in real life, let alone on social media. So
the government's constantly try and sell so many policies, either on the grounds that they'll protect children or that they'll protect women and girls. Meanwhile, they let rapists and child murderers out of prison.
So you referred earlier on to the example of Australia, where they have banned social media for under 16s. And somebody from our sister organisation in Australia has written in and to say he does actually support the ban. He says accessing social media sites has nothing to do with their rights of free speech. It only limits the avenues of that free speech, and it protects children from digital harassment and porn. So, and he does concede that 80% of children in Australia have managed to bypass the screening methods, as you said earlier, which is entirely what I expect young people to do, given their ability to produce fake ID to get into pubs.
Yeah, you can imagine actually it creating a kind of new kind of status barrier for kids, like the poor 20% who haven't figured out how to get onto social media, how to bypass the ban, presumably are kind of at the bottom of the status hierarchy in their classrooms.
So where would the enforcement be taking place then? Do you think is it right for do parents, should they be fearful of what this means for them?
Well, you hear some parents say, this is going to be helpful. I'll be able to say to my children, what you're trying to do is unlawful. But I don't think the government have given much thought, at least at this point, to how it's going to be enforced.
So on the issue of enforceability, Toby, how on earth this is going to possibly work in practice, Chris Hawker asks, will young people be prosecuted?
Well, we don't know yet because we haven't seen the regulations. But I'd be very surprised if prosecuting children was the way the government is going to propose the enforcement of this ban. More likely to be parents, more likely to be social media companies for not doing enough to exclude children from their sites. One thing we haven't discussed yet is client-side scanning. So the government have also said that in order to stop children sending or receiving sexualized images, they want the mobile phone manufacturers to monitor everything you're sending and receiving on your phone to ensure that no sexualized content is being sent by children to each other.
Wow.
And that is a Pandora's box I hope this government wouldn't open. And they've said, if you don't do this voluntarily, we're going to force you to do it by legislation.
Right. Do you think is a better solution than something like specific products that have already got restrictions built in that parents can buy for their children? Is that a reasonable solution there?
You could certainly, I mean, there are a vast range of products out there to restrict what children can see on social media. It can impose a curfew. I mean, we experimented with it with our teenage children, my wife and I, and of course they got around it all pretty quickly. But that does sound like a much more liberal solution. Yes, I mean the problem with client-side scanning is, the scope, I'm sure, will be very narrowly drawn if the government do end up legislating. It will just be, child sexual content. But that scope will inevitably grow and creep, and it will begin to include all sorts of other things.
I've got this image of children not being on social media and not being on their phones, but meanwhile all the adults around them are completely neglectful because they are. So they're still on social media to the same degree, but the children are kind of ignored with nothing to do and no guidance.
The funny thing in the House of Lords, when this is being debated, I mean, there is an overwhelming majority of peers are very keen on a social media ban for under 16s and wax on about the dangers of doom scrolling and the effects it has on children's mental health. All the while these debates are taking place in the House of Lords chamber, they are all, without exception, on their phones, doom scrolling. Yes.
No, it's interesting. It is. I mean, to me, it's very similar to the arguments that have been used about television, cinema, all of the kind of forms of the media. Even reading, way back in the day, it was seen as being deleterious to the minds of the formation of young minds. So there's something there that, if you just focus on the tech, you ignore the fact that what young people need really is very, very strong guidance from all of the adults in their lives, their parents and everybody else. And
I think, and I think that's one of the criticisms of these proposals, which I think has really landed, which is that if parents are concerned about the effects of being on social media on the mental health of their children, then they should step in. They should be parents. Act like grown-ups, be the adult in the room. Don't expect the government to kind of intervene and do your parenting job for you.
Yes. With how on earth it's going to get up close to actually that kind of level of care that's required. Are there any other issues that we haven't covered, do you think, that we should?
Well, there's an issue which the Free Speech Union has been campaigning on, which is, believe it or not, there are some free speech safeguards built into the Online Safety Act. The Free Speech Union and other organisations campaigned for them, lobbied for them when the Online Safety Act was going through Parliament. And one of them is that social media companies are supposed to have regard. I think it may even be particular regard, which is stronger than due regard, apparently.
Yes.
Particular regard for freedom of expression before deciding to remove content. That has been activated, but there were two additional safeguards as well, which is that social media companies are supposed to give a much higher level of protection, i.e. not remove content of democratic importance and journalistic content. But those free speech safeguards haven't been activated yet.
Right.
3 years after the bill received royal assent. And the excuse Ofcom comes up with is that those duties will only apply to Category 1 providers, and we haven't yet got around to designating what social media platforms should be classed as being in Category 1 yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's supposed to happen quite soon, but until that happens, those safeguards won't apply. And when they do apply, it'll be interesting to see how they're compatible with banning under 16s from accessing, news content on social media. Won't that be journalistic content of democratic importance that they should have access to under those clauses of the Online Safety Act?
Yeah. It does seem like these kind of proposals come from just a sort of bubble-like consensus amongst a certain set of policymakers for whom they think it's entirely obvious what is good content, what's bad content, what's safe, what's dangerous, what's democratic, what's not.
Yes.
And it's only when they're forced to interrogate it by people like you in the Lords, the kind of awkward squad, that these things start to fall apart. But prior to that, it's just blithely assumed that everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, the government throw around these words like mis and disinformation and hate speech, thinking that they're completely unambiguous and command universal assent, and ignore the fact that they're often politically charged value judgments kind of shot through with kind of subjectivity. I'll give you one example of the government spreading disinformation, in my view, in order to sell the conversion practices ban, which has just appeared before Parliament in the form of a draft bill and is about to go through pre-legislative scrutiny. They maintain that all sorts of cruel and abusive conversion practices are currently legal, and therefore this bill is required to criminalise them. Well, actually, almost everything that's conjured up by the phrase cruel and abusive conversion practice is already illegal in this country and has been for some time. But by telling people that there is this gap in the law, people who are being subjected to illegal, cruel and abusive conversion practices won't realise that what's being done to them is against the law and won't report their abusers to the police. That is, I think, a textbook example of the offence drawn up in the Online Safety Act, Section 179, of knowingly spreading false information that's likely to cause non-trivial psychological harm to a likely audience. So, I think there's a case for referring the government ministers advocating for this ghastly piece of legislation to the police for being in breach of the Online Safety Act, for knowingly spreading false and harmful information.
That's a very Toby point.
Actually got it off a forum in Scotland.
I'm trying to follow it. Very good. So on the subject of the proposed conversion therapy ban, that will be the topic of our next podcast. So people should hit subscribe and notifications to make sure they get that as soon as it comes out. And so it's been popular for the Prime Minister, these proposals around social media, by the looks of things, amongst a certain constituency. Do you think that Andy Burnham will take it forward and run with it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And I think not just because it's popular, not just because he doesn't want to be on the back foot, with Kemi kind of accusing the government of U-turning on this and not doing enough to protect children. I think she's been effective in petitioning for these measures, and it's made life quite difficult for me as a Kemi-appointed Conservative peer in the House of Lords who takes the Conservative whip. But I think one of the reasons Andy is very unlikely to abandon these proposals is that he people joke about him kind of describing himself, or others describing him, as Labour's first female prime minister. But I think he does want his administration, his premiership, to be coded female. He often talks about how impressed he is by these strong, powerful Labour women surrounding him. He's going to have, I think, more women in his cabinet than Keir Starmer. And, without wanting to sound sexist or kind of traffic in gender stereotypes, prioritising safety over liberty is something that's going to play well, I think, with that particular constituency.
Yes, I think that's probably right. I mean, there's certainly, anybody who feels like they're looking out for children, this is a really hard argument. I mean, it's not, we shouldn't underestimate how difficult this is to actually pursue. And so finally, what's your message to people who are concerned about this? I mean, are we kind of waiting, or are we already kind of on manoeuvres trying to make sure we're in a position to move fast if things develop?
Yes, I think we're waiting for the regulations to be published. That may not happen until the autumn. It probably won't happen before the summer recess. But once they are published, probably in September, maybe in October, we'll then scrutinise them with our lawyers and perhaps talk to some of the social media companies likely to be adversely affected, like X, like YouTube, and see if there are some legal challenges we can bring.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much, Toby. And thanks to everybody who wrote their questions and sent them to us. I know we haven't got through all of them, but we've hopefully reflected most of the concerns that people have. So thanks again, Toby.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for listening to the FSU's podcast. We've now helped over 6,000 people who got into trouble for exercising their right to lawful free speech. And where those cases have come to a conclusion, we've been successful over 80% of the time. So please do become a member of the Free Speech Union. If a cancellation mob ever come for you, it'll be the best money you've ever spent. There's a link in the show notes.